my name is Allie. Welcome to my channel where we chat about all things bookish. Today we're talking about everything I read in December and building my January TBR. Just a heads up, I am a little under the weather. I have a head cold, and so my voice I think sounds pretty terrible, but we're gonna get through it and we're gonna talk about everything I read in December. In December, I started the month with reading Flowers for the Sea by Zin E. Rocklyn. This is a kind of fantasy horror novella about a woman who is kind of ostracized on this like post-apocalyptic ship that she's on. Like basically all of humanity is on this ship. They've like fled the shore and everything like that. And she's like a different race from everyone else, and so she's ostracized, but she's also the only woman on board that has been able to carry a pregnancy to term. So it's like this weird juxtaposition of like no one really wants to deal with her, but also like they want like babies on the ship and they want to continue like their bloodlines and things like that. So there's lots of themes of like pregnancy, of child labor, and then like of motherhood. And there's also like this overarching theme of like anger as self-empowerment and as anger to empower yourself to freedom. And I really enjoyed those themes, but ultimately the novella fell a little flat for me. I rated it 2.5 stars. I just feel like the pacing was a little bit different. Like I could have benefited from a little bit more beginning context and a little bit more ending context. I really do feel like someone took like the middle 10 chapters of a book, and I needed the beginning 10 chapters and the end 10 chapters to kind of make it make a little bit more sense and make it paced a little bit better. So overall, it just didn't hit for me, but I did enjoy those themes of like child labor, pregnancy, and anger as a tool for empowerment and freedom. Then I read Have Yourself a Magic Little Murder by Meghan Mazzaferro. This is a cozy fantasy mystery about a witch who has been banished from the witching world to live in the town of Mistletoe for a year. She is kind of going through this like legal process. She's being accused of like causing someone's death. And so she's banished to the human world basically for 1 year, and she's not able to use her magic. So while she's there, they help secure her a temporary job at the mall as one of Santa's seasonal elves, and that is kind of where we start. Overall, I think that this book was the right amount of Christmassy, if that makes sense. I read it like Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, but I also could like envision myself reading it in February or June or August, and it wouldn't be too Christmassy. Like it's not necessarily on the nose that I only would want to read it in December. As for the pacing and the mystery itself, I think it was done really, really well. I didn't really have many guesses as to who done it until our main character started putting everything together, and I think that it was laid out pretty well. This is the first in a, I think, series. I'm not sure how many she's going to be doing, and I definitely went to like figure out what happens next. I rated this one 4.5 stars, and ultimately I think that what I want more from this book is just to know a little bit more about the witching world, like how is it separate from the human world, things like that. So I hope those questions get answered in the next book. Next up, I have Never Whistle at Night, which is an Indigenous dark fiction anthology. It's a bunch of dark fiction stories written by Indigenous authors. Well, I feel like this anthology had a good variety of stories. Like none of them felt like copy and paste, none of them felt like really the same. Only a couple of them really stood out to me, and I don't think I rated any story higher than a 4-star. Overall, for anthologies, I literally rate each story and then I take the average of that, and that's what I rate the book. And so the average was a 3-star rating for this anthology, which honestly is pretty on board for anthologies that I read. There's always going to be a wide variety of ratings and different stories in these anthologies that I read. I think the majority of the problems that I had with these stories was like the pacing of the short stories, which I'm sure is like the hardest thing in the world to nail down. I could not imagine pacing a short story really well, especially like a horror short story. And then also like just an air of confusion. Like there's a lot more stories that left me a little bit more confused and wondering what was going on than there were stories that like really hit the spot. Overall, I think it's a decent anthology, but it's just not something that's going to stick to my brain and not something I'm really going to think about. Next up, we have The Desert Talon by Karin Lowachee. This is a fantasy novella. This is the second in a trilogy of novellas. I absolutely adored the first one, The Mountain Crown, and this is kind of like a continuation of that story. I rated this one 4 stars. I did enjoy it. We still had some themes of like industrialization, of colonization, of indigenous peoples having their land like stripped away from them, and then we had this like concept of the Basuan and the Suan, which is like their like cultural term for dragon. They're not dragons, they're Suan. They can kind of communicate with them through kind of like a telepathic feeling. It's really cool, it's really unique, but it's also hard to explain. I definitely want to do like an in-depth video on all three once I read all three. This one just took me a little bit longer to be drawn in. The first one I was drawn in immediately. I was drawn in for the entire book. I like cried when I was over. Like it was a really, really good novella. This one just was like a little bit less good. It was a 4-star. I still enjoyed it. I want to read the third one. I want to see what happens next, but it just wasn't as good as the first one. I still think you should read it. I still rated it 4 stars. I really still liked it. I'm just still reeling from the feeling of the first book, if that makes sense. All right, next we have Running Close to the Wind by Alexandra Rowland. I listened to this one on audiobook, and I think that's the only way this book should ever be consumed, because Casey Jones, the audiobook narrator, does a phenomenal job. I can't imagine like reading this and not like hearing him read it out loud. Like it was just such a well done audiobook. So shout out to Casey Jones and shout out to whoever hired him to do this audiobook, because it was phenomenal. All right, Running Close to the Wind by Alexandra Rowland is like the most unserious book that I've ever read. In this book, we're following Avra, and at the beginning, he accidentally commits treason because of his like witchy luck that's been following him around for years. And because of that witchy luck, he also finds himself back on his ex's ship, which is Captain Tev, our favorite non-binary pirate captain ever. Finds out that Tev has found this very, very hot monk named Julian. And Avra gets a little jealous at first because, you know, he is Tev's. But it turns out, even though everyone thinks Julian is just so hot, and Tev and Avra have started this little competition of who's going to bed him first, turns out Julian has a very unfortunate vow of celibacy. So we have this like little polyamorous like triad going on, but like Julian's vow of celibacy is just kind of throwing a wrench in things. We're talking about sea serpents and like mysterious potions. We're kind of going through these antics, and there's a fantastic cake competition at the end. So it's a comedic fantasy. We have queer poly pirates, we have a non-binary captain, we have a lot of queer normacy, of course, and then one very unfortunate vow of celibacy. I rated it 5 stars. Again, it was just like the best read and so unserious, and I just had fun throughout the entire thing. It was fun. So that's everything that I read in December, and that finished up my year of reading 73 books. I had a reading goal of 52, and so I am very proud to have surpassed that and have read 73. For this next year, I'm gonna keep a 52 book goal. But for now, let's go ahead and turn to figuring out my January TBR and what I'm gonna be reading in the next month. So for this year, I am trying out a book journal, and I actually was able to obtain one of the Illumicrate reading journals that they put out in their July or August box. I don't know, someone was selling just the journal on Pango, and I thought it'd be best to start my reading journal journey with something that was already made as opposed to like making something myself. So we're going to be filling out the monthly TBR with my January TBR. I don't think I've made a video about this, but I do have a 25 for 25 TBR list, and it is 25 books that I want to read in the year 2025 that I want to just like hold myself accountable to read. So a lot of them were like Latina voices, Palestinian voices, disabled voices, voices that I thought were missing from my 2024 reads. So what we're going to do each month is pull one of the months will have to be 3, but pull 2 titles from my 25 or 25 TBR and then kind of supplement it from there. First one is Fallible Justice by Laura Loxo. This is a paranormal fantasy mystery, I think. The main character has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and so does the author. So that is our first one for my TBR. And the second one, always cat noises, is Time Travelers, an anthology. So this is an anthology of Palestinian speculative fiction. I'm kind of excited about both of these. I've been wanting to read Fallible Justice since like March of last year, and I think Time Travelers came out like recently, like within the past like 4 months. So those are our first 2. Let's get to putting it in the book. Alright, so here's my monthly spread. You can ignore the ink stains. I really wanted to use my fountain pen for this. For some reason, it's not behaving today. So we're gonna make January just a regular pen. Alright, so our first one was Fallible Justice. And then the second one was Time Travelers. And that one was just an anthology, so we'll leave it as it is. The next ones I'll add are the 2 books that I am currently reading, which is At the End of the River Styx. And the other book that I am currently reading is The Principle of Moments by Esme J. Gamey Pearson. I am a bit of a mood reader, so even though I know I'm going to want to read these 2, and I'm probably going to finish these 2, I'm going to add a few more. First off, down here at the bottom, I'm going to add the 2 books that I have requested on NetGalley that are published in January. I just haven't heard back from them yet, so I might get to them, and I might have access to them, and I might not. So the first one is Liar's Kingdom, and the second one is the Wishlist Ones. As I'm doing this, I feel like they should have given me a little bit more lines for the author's name. But alright, to add to this, I'm going to put in Inferno's Heir. I don't remember how to do an uppercase cursive either, so sorry. This is one of the bindery imprint books, and I do have a copy here. I also kind of want to get into my romance era in 2025, and so I think I am going to find Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonin Young. Probably find that from the library. And then I'm going to finish it all out with a nonfiction book, which is one that I'm getting back from the library, and that is Braiding Sweetgrass. Is it the most aesthetic? No, but it is mine. Thank you so much for putting up with my sick voice and watching my December reading wrap up and my January TBR. I hope you've had a fantastic New Year's Day and New Year's Eve, and I hope we all have a good 2025. Thanks for watching.